For today's edition of TYT Daily, we're talking with Senior Investigative Reporter Ken Klippenstein, and we're talking about a story that Ken broke today about the ICE detainee situation, specifically regarding health, the health of detainees, and multiple warnings, according to documents that Ken obtained, showing that even in the cases of some fatalities, ICE officials knew beforehand that there were problems with the way they were being treated or not treated, and these warnings appear to have been ignored. How's it going, Ken?
Hey, Jonathan, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's your show too, right? I mean, this is our channel, so I'm glad we could get you into the mix here. So tell us a little bit about, you obtained the documents obviously through a source that you're naming, but tell us a little bit about what the documents specifically told you.
So what these internal ICE documents show, or at the very least allege, is that, number of fatalities as well as, serious health incidents like seizures and things have been going on in ICE detention facilities because of the processes in place that don't get them, adequate care that they need, and that attempts have been made to notify ICE leadership about this, so it's unlikely that they don't know about it, and there doesn't appear to have been any sort of response to try to address these problems.
And you spoke to a source who described the problem as systemic. A lot of the situations you talk about in your new piece seem to revolve around the combination of potentially suicidal detainees and the need to I guess the term is detox, even if it's not necessarily a problem of them being on addictive substances, but dealing with the changes in their medication. Can you explain exactly what the issue was there?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the documents, what they give us insight into is a host of different, procedural problems with the ICE healthcare system. Ranging up to, as we mentioned, things that unfortunately resulted in deaths. And one of the big problems is that whenever a serious medical event happens, there's a report generated specifically to try to alarm or notify medical leadership that something is awry. And according to these documents, at least, when these notifications happen, there's no response. And so in the case of one of the deaths, if I recall correctly, there were almost a dozen of these, emergency warnings that went on, and there was no response to it from leadership. And so the documents describe the death of this one individual as preventable, if only leadership had responded to these various warnings. But it's not just deaths. The documents describe a failure on the part of ICE to as you mentioned, detox or kind of, taper people down, not just addicts, but people on medications, things like benzodiazepines. These are standard anti-anxiety medications that you can get for next to nothing. I mean, they're, available generic. They won't even provide them with the necessary ones just to kind of taper them so that when they get deported, or even if they're just in detention, they're not going to go into some kind of, shock or reaction that you get from withdrawal. And so just from these documents alone, I think I saw it's been half a dozen cases at least in just the last in just over just a few months period, showing people going into seizures and injuring themselves because they weren't given medications to either detox or taper them, or even just maintain where they were at, because it's dangerous to pull someone off of whether it's alcohol or medication or whatever, without any sort of plan to prevent them going into withdrawal. So as you say, this was described as systemic within the agency, which is shocking because a lot of these medications to detox people cost almost nothing. I mean, this would not be a very time-intensive or costly process to undertake. So that was sort of surprising to me.
And so you're reporting that some of these cases, there were medical warnings and treatment warnings that went unheeded or unresponded to. And in at least some of these cases, in addition to the medical issues, the baseline monitoring was not done. Some of the cases you talk about were already in the news, right? Because the monitoring that's supposed to be done for these people was not being done, right? So am I right in thinking that it's sort of a perfect storm of neglect here that contributed to these deaths?
Yeah, that's exactly correct. And you know, what my source in ICE has told me is that you know, it goes well beyond what had been publicly reported in terms of all of these warning signs and you know, attempts on the part of ICE health staff to notify leadership to do something about this. So it would appear that, you know, these aren't accidents; they're recurring, and there's evidence that superiors had been contacted about it.
And when you say superiors and leadership, do you have a concrete sense of how high up these warnings actually made it?
Yeah, so it seems like healthcare staff, you know, are fairly well informed of what's going on. But when they escalate these things up to chain of command, there's no response from the people that actually have the power to, you know, effectuate any sort of procedural change. And so what the documents show is attempts to notify people going right up to the acting director of ICE, who, you know, by the way, Trump had intended to make head of, you know, formal head of ICE. That didn't end up happening, but it's clear that he's, you know, a very high-ranking figure within the agency.
And you pointed out in your article that he was reported to have said some controversial remarks last year. Can you quickly update us on that, and then we'll wrap up?
Yeah, it's pretty shocking. He described ICE detention as, if I remember the quote, essentially like summer camp, which, you know, upset a lot of people for you know, obvious reasons. And you know, while he's saying this, literally these you know, very basic failure to provide you know, what you'd find in a lot of federal prisons or, you know, other institutions that you know, are not exactly these utopian systems, you know. So yeah, that's his background. He very much in the Trump mold in terms of his rhetoric, and you know, I mean, ICE has had problems for a long time, but this is a different. It does seem to be a different kind of orientation under the present administration than what we had seen before.
And it also sounds like, from what you're saying, there do remain within ICE some people who do care about rectifying this stuff, right?
That's absolutely true. I see that a lot when we say ICE to sort of you know, casual audience. You know, they might not have time to read into these things, and they just picture the guy arresting, you know, someone, maybe splitting up a family. And while that exists within ICE, there's also, you know, a lot of very well trained. There's former FBI that don't actually do the, you know, family separations and things, that they're just doing maybe drug interdiction, stuff like that. There's also bunch of medical staff. I didn't know, you know, a lot of this coming into this story, and I already known some about ICE. So it's not just the guys that split up families. There are actually a lot of people that come from different parts of government, have training completely, you know, unrelated to immigration. And so, yeah, that's why it's interesting to see the sort of internal dissension that appears to be happening within the agency over a lot of these
Well, Ken,
issues.
thanks for joining us, and thanks for doing the work this morning, this report, and hopefully we'll get better at folding you into more of these TYTI dailies, because I know people want to talk to you and hear about your work and your reporting as well. And we normally do these live on YouTube every weekday morning, so I hope if you want to stay on top of what we're doing, both our investigative work as well as we do analysis and commentary on important stories of the day, just subscribe at YouTube. You can also check these out on Facebook and like and follow us there and all that stuff. And we'll see you tomorrow.